When legislator Jasmine Crockett stood up in the National Judicial Building, the room went quiet. Her dark blue outfit looked sharp under the bright lights, showing how calm and strong she was. Magistrate Judge Reeves, known for being strict and experienced, leaned forward with interest. Everyone knew what was about to happen would be history-making. The human rights session had been going on for days, with lawyers arguing about voting rights. The room was tense as each side made their case. But when Crockett stepped up to give her final statement, you could feel a shift in the room. The other lawyers had just finished a long argument, saying the concerns of minority groups had been taken care of. They thought they had a solid case, but they had no idea what was coming. Magistrate Reeves, who had seen it all, noticed something was different. As Crockett spoke with more passion, his face changed. He raised his eyebrows slightly and stopped writing. He leaned back, realizing this was something special. What Crockett was about to say would soon be known as one of the most talked about moments in law. Before we get into this story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It's cool to see how these moments affect people everywhere. And don't forget to stay tuned so you don't miss these important events that are shaping our country. The judicial space was packed with people who support human rights, law experts, and reporters. They knew this was big, but nobody expected what was about to happen. Crockett prepped hard for this big moment, spending weeks looking into every detail, legal precedent, and possible argument. She knew this was her shot to make a real change, challenge things as they are, and push for fairness. Jasmine Crockett's all about grit and toughness. She didn't come from privilege. Growing up in Missouri, she saw firsthand what it meant to fight for every opportunity. As a young black woman finding her way in a world full of unfair rules, she faced challenges most lawyers can barely imagine. But instead of letting those things beat her, she used them to fuel her drive. She worked hard to get through law school, earning her degree with pure determination and focus. Eventually, she became a respected lawyer in Texas, known for her honesty and never giving up. At 43, Crockett's career hit a high point when she was elected to Congress, showing how far she'd come. Supporters saw her as a smart strategist, ready for anything, firm in her beliefs, and ready to fight for working families and people who are often ignored. She was known for doing her homework, always ready with facts and proof that could take down even the toughest arguments. More than her legal skills, Crockett stood out because she was real. She talked about her own experiences, shared the stories of her voters, and showed the real-world impact of voting rights. Her words carried weight because they came from a place of real understanding and resonated with everyone listening. Judge Reeves wasn't just any judge. Known for fairness, wisdom, and a strong sense of justice, he'd handled many important cases, but he knew Crockett's statement would be special. The courtroom was ready to witness a moment that would not only challenge the arguments, but also inspire a fresh sense of purpose in the ongoing fight for fairness and equality. Appointed to the federal bench, Judge Reeves spent years building a reputation as one of the most respected legal minds in the country. All the while, he had earned praise not only for his intelligence, but also for his commitment to justice and the rule of law. The judge was known for looking at proof closely and understanding basic ideas. His legal actions were calm and balanced. At 61, he had overseen some of the most important civil rights cases of recent times, cases that had changed the legal world and affected society. Lawyers knew that they had to bring their best arguments. Judge Reeves was known for a lack of patience for messy thinking, too much emotion, or efforts to get around legal rules. To impress him, one had to provide facts, relevant legal examples, and arguments built on law. Despite his hard legal standards, Judge Reeves also knew the weight of history that his decisions carried. As a black judge working in the federal court system, he was aware of the importance of the cases before him. He'd seen firsthand how court decisions could change lives, reshape communities, and affect the progress of civil rights. He believed that every ruling could either push equality forward or set it back in the fight for fairness. Across from the judge sat a bunch of really good lawyers, symbolizing worries set on getting rid of ballot protections. These weren't just any lawyers. They were from some of the most famous and pricey law firms around. These firms are known for making complicated legal arguments and finding loopholes that could weaken our rights. Their main lawyer, a senior partner with over 30 years under his belt, had just wrapped up what they thought was a perfect, airtight case. Their strategy was simple but smart. Use loads of legal jargon and details to cast doubt on why we need ballot safeguards, painting them as old rules that don't do anything good anymore. They claimed that voting bias was a thing of the past and that current laws were overdoing it. Confident in their legal footing, they leaned heavily on precedent, believing their carefully crafted arguments based on a close read of the laws would win. Their defense downplayed the real-world impact of their stance, framing their case as just legal, with little thought for how it would actually affect voters. Leaning back in their fancy fancy leather seats, they figured they'd successfully torn down the argument for stronger ballot safeguards, convinced that their legal specifics had locked up the case for them. But this was way bigger than just another courtroom thing. The result of this case had huge implications for the voting rights of millions of Americans. At stake were laws that would decide how easy it is for everyday folks, working families, seniors, and underrepresented groups to use their most basic right, the right to vote. The other side wanted to axe weekend voting, shorten early voting periods, and make ID requirements stricter. Critics said these moves would unfairly hit low-income communities, making it harder for them to vote. The defense claimed these changes were needed to stop voter fraud, even though there's tons of proof that voter fraud is super rare and barely ever changes election results. For people like Crockett and other rights advocates, this case was way more than just legal stuff. It showed the difference between a government that's fair to everyone and one that puts up roadblocks, making it tough for some groups to fully participate in voting. They knew that if they lost this case, similar restrictions could pop up all over the country, possibly changing the outcomes of future elections and pushing the country's democratic path in a direction that shut out and hurt vulnerable people. They understood that the stakes went far beyond the courtroom, touching on the core ideas of equality, fairness, and the very future of American government. Everyone in the courtroom knew how important the moment was. Judge Reeves's decision could either strengthen current voting rights or weaken them, making it harder to vote. Every piece of evidence, every argument, and every legal detail played a key role in shaping the outcome. It was clear the court was at a major turning point in the ongoing fight over ballot protections. Crockett, a seasoned lawyer known for being super prepared and having a commanding presence, was ready to give what many saw as the performance of her whole legal career, an argument that could decide the future of voting fairness in the country. The hearing started pretty normally, at least on the surface. Both sides got to make their opening statements, laying out their arguments with legal jargon and lots of examples. The defense went first, using up almost 2 hours to argue that current voting safeguards are outdated and unnecessary now. Their lawyer, a gray-haired guy in a fancy suit, looked every bit the part. He sounded super confident, like he'd won cases like this before. He used charts and graphs to try and prove that voting was easy for everyone now. He spoke smoothly, sounding like an expert, but he seemed disconnected from what voters actually go through. "Your Honor," he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a confident flick. "The evidence clearly shows that the other side's worries are based on old ideas about voting access. Our systems make sure every qualified citizen can vote while keeping our elections honest." As the day went on, each side brought in experts, political scientists, legal scholars, data analysts, all backing up their side. The defense experts insisted that voting rules, like voter ID laws and registration rules, were reasonable and fair. They threw out numbers and academic terms to sound neutral and serious. But in the audience, filled with civil rights supporters, a feeling of frustration was growing. They saw through the legal talk, knowing that behind the numbers were real people whose lives were being affected. They were worried about the real problems faced by seniors, people with disabilities, and working-class folks trying to vote, who often get stopped by the system. These people knew that the talk about fairness often hid deeper problems. They understood that this wasn't just about legal theories, but about the future of their democracy. Judge Reeves kept a calm and professional demeanor, showing the serious nature of his job. But those who knew him could see hints of his engagement. He asked sharp questions that showed he really knew the legal stuff and the social issues at stake. For example, when one expert said voter ID laws didn't create big problems, Judge Reeves leaned forward looking closely. He asked, "Counselor, how's a working parent with 2 jobs and no car supposed to get the necessary ID during business hours, especially when the DMV is only open when they're working?" The question caught the expert off guard, bringing the issue down to earth, something that numbers and legal arguments often didn't do. The expert paused. "Well, Your Honor," he stammered, "there are ways to accommodate those situations." Judge Reeves, staying neutral but wanting details, replied, "Oh, there are. Please explain those accommodations so everyone understands how they work in real life." The courtroom went quiet for a moment, showing the weight of his words. As the day went on, it became clear that the defense's easy win wasn't going to happen. Judge Reeves's questions showed he understood the issues better. He knew the matter was more than just legal details or data. The challenge to the other side's claims was getting stronger, and the outcome of the case was still up in the air. Judge Reeves's questions got sharper, more focused, and more aimed at understanding the real-world impacts of the ideas being discussed. He wasn't just mentioning case law or relying on theories. Instead, he was seriously checking how these regulations, if put in place, would genuinely hit everyday life for normal folks. His series of questions mirrored a wish to move past theoretical legal ideas and explore concrete concrete, practical influences on society, stressing that the statutes must assist the individuals it seeks to safeguard and regulate. The mood in the courtroom shifted during a quick break. You could see the lawyers for the other side huddled together, looking worried and uncomfortable. The confidence they had this morning was starting to crack under Judge Reeves's tough questions. They weren't presenting their case as smoothly as before, and you could tell they knew that the judge was digging into areas they weren't ready for. Meanwhile, Crockett stayed cool at her desk. She was going over her notes one last time, not seeming bothered by the tension. If you looked closely, you could see she was super focused, like she knew this was coming. She sat up straight, looking calm and confident, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She had this quiet strength, like she was totally ready to speak. When everyone came back, Judge Reeves said it was time for closing arguments. He told the other lawyers to give their final thoughts, and they seemed like they needed to recover from the grilling they just got. They stuck closely to what they'd already prepared, trying to stay safe. They talked about legal precedents and basic principles, carefully avoiding how their ideas would actually affect people. Their presentation felt kind of empty, not as sure as they were earlier. The confident tone they had before was gone, replaced by something more hesitant. It was as if they knew their case was being seriously questioned, and that the flaws in their arguments were getting harder to ignore. As they finished up, the courtroom went quiet. Everyone knew what was coming next. A moment of truth, the last chance for each side to make their case. Judge Reeves looked over at Crockett and gave her a nod. In a calm voice, he said, "Miss Crockett, you may now give your closing statement." The whole room seemed to hold its breath as everyone turned to look at her. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the highlight of days of arguing and legal sparring. Crockett stood up slowly and deliberately, looking powerful. She didn't rush to the stand or fumble with her papers. Instead, she took a moment to look around the courtroom, making eye contact with the supporters and legal experts who had come from all over to see this. Her dark red suit was perfectly smooth, showing how professional she was. She stood straight, looking determined. The afternoon sun came in through the tall windows, making her seem to glow as she walked to the front of the room. When she got to the stand, she put her hands lightly on the wooden surface. Her wedding ring caught the light as she adjusted her notes for what she knew would be one of the most important speeches of her career. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. People in the audience leaned forward, sensing that something big was about to happen. In a clear, steady voice that showed both respect and confidence, Crockett began her closing statement. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "What we've heard today are two completely different ideas about what American justice should be." Judge Reeves leaned back in his chair, pen ready to take notes. His glasses reflected the light as he watched her closely, knowing that this closing statement would probably be different from all the others he'd heard. Even though he'd seen countless cases and heard tons of closing arguments, there was something about Crockett that made him suspect her words would hit hard and stick with everyone there. The second she walked into court, you noticed her. It wasn't arrogance. It was this quiet confidence, like she'd seen it all. You could tell she drew strength from every story she'd ever heard, every community she'd helped, every problem she'd overcome. She had this presence that made you pay attention. Across the room, the opposing lawyers sat stiffly. They knew all their fancy arguments and strategies could fall apart in seconds. Their expensive briefcases stayed shut, their practiced comebacks suddenly feeling weak against her calm, strong vibe. The lead lawyer was tapping his pen a little too fast as he watched Crockett get ready to speak. The courtroom was dead silent except for the AC humming and the traffic outside. Even the court reporter seemed to be holding her breath, fingers hovering over her keyboard, ready to catch every word. Crockett paused, gathering her thoughts. She knew she was about to deliver one of the most convincing arguments these people had ever heard. In that silence, you could tell she wasn't just relying on her legal knowledge, but on every story she'd heard, every community she'd supported, and every person who'd been silenced by the problems her case was fighting. "Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice carrying the weight of years. "My opponents have spent all day talking about cases and the Foundation's ideas. They've used charts and studies to back up their claims, but they've missed one big thing: the real lives of the people they're trying to hurt." Judge Reeves stopped writing and stared at Crockett, really listening. Everyone in the courtroom knew this wasn't just another legal fight. It was about something bigger: personal stories, real experiences, and how these laws actually impact people. "They're telling you that voting access isn't a problem anymore," Crockett continued, stepping closer to the bench to drive home her point. "They're showing you numbers that suggest voting bias is a thing of the past. But, Your Honor, I want to tell you about Mrs. Williams." The courtroom leaned in as Crockett painted a picture lecture with her words. Mrs. Williams is 73 years old and lives in my district in Texas. She's voted in every election for the last 50 years. Voting's been a part of her life since the Voting Rights Act gave her that right. She raised 4 kids on her own, working hard at 2 jobs just to make ends meet. She never missed an election because she knew her vote was her voice, her power to shape her community, her future, and her rights. Judge Reeves was now completely focused on every word Crockett spoke. His pen had stopped moving completely, and his face showed a seriousness that everyone in the courtroom could feel. The opposing lawyers shifted uncomfortably, realizing their carefully crafted legal arguments were about to be challenged by the raw reality of someone's life. Last year, Mrs. Williams tried to cast her ballot. She brought the same ID she'd been using for years, her social security card and a utility bill, papers that had always been enough. But under the new rules supported by my opponents, that wasn't enough anymore. Now she needed a driver's license or a government-issued ID to prove who she was. The very same ID she'd used for decades suddenly didn't meet the new, stricter requirements. In that moment, Crockett's voice expressed not only the unfairness faced by Mrs. Williams, but also the wider impact of laws that claim to be neutral but disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, especially the elderly, the poor, and those who don't have easy access to certain forms of ID. She made it clear that behind every number, every legal argument, there's a personal story. People whose lives are directly affected, whose voices could be silenced if these restrictive policies continued. The courtroom remained silent as Crockett's words resonated with everyone, turning a legal argument into a powerful appeal based on empathy and justice. Her story highlighted the harsh reality that despite claims of progress, many people still face big problems when trying to use their basic right to vote, problems that threaten the very foundations of democracy and fairness. Crockett's speech was calm, but you could feel the serious emotion behind it. It showed how important this case was to her. Mrs. Williams hadn't driven in 15 years because she couldn't afford a car. The DMV was super far from her place, like 27 miles, and it was only open when she was working, which made it impossible for her to get there to renew her license or get the ID she needed to vote. Since she was on a fixed income, she couldn't take time off work. Judge Reeves leaned forward, looking serious, showing he was really paying attention. The whole room felt different now. It wasn't just about legal stuff. It was about how real people were affected. This wasn't just some academic debate. It was about how policies could mess with regular folks trying to vote. Crockett kept going, raising her voice a bit to really get her point across. "Your Honor," she said, "how is Mrs. Williams supposed to vote? My opponents say there are ways to help voters like her, but they can't or won't say what those ways are because they don't exist." The room went quiet. Even the court reporters seemed to type softer, like they didn't want to break the spell or interrupt what she was saying. Crockett wasn't done. She said Mrs. Williams wasn't alone. There are tons of people across the country in the same boat. Working parents can't afford to take time off. Older people on fixed incomes can't afford to travel to far-off government offices. Young students who don't have cars don't have driver's licenses. College students' school addresses aren't accepted as proof of residence for voting. These are the realities for so many Americans who are being kept from voting by rules that make it way too hard. But Crockett knew that feelings alone weren't enough. She switched from personal stories to legal arguments, building a solid case that even conservative judges would have a hard time ignoring. Speaking directly to the court, she brought up the Constitution. "Your Honor, the 15th Amendment says that the right to vote can't be denied based on race or color. Voting rights are protected from unfair rules that target certain groups." She paused, letting her words sink in. Not limited, not made harder, and definitely not exposed to rules to keep people from voting. She stressed these last points, emphasizing the importance of that constitutional promise. Judge Reeves leaned forward a bit, the first sign he'd shown all day that he was reacting. It was subtle, but everyone noticed. The legal experts in the audience saw it as a sign that he recognized the important constitutional points Crockett was making. Known for his deep knowledge of the Constitution, Judge Reeves paid close attention to the exact wording of legal documents. Crockett was speaking his language. She continued, mentioning the Supreme Court's view that any rule on voting rights had to be important for the government and carefully designed for that goal. She challenged her opponent's claims head-on. They say their rules prevent voter fraud, but they haven't shown a single real case of voter fraud that these rules would stop. With that groundwork laid, Crockett started taking apart her opponent's arguments, not with boring legal jargon, but by connecting each point to the real lives of actual people. She questioned the need for voter ID laws, asking, good for who? Good for the rich expert who drives to work every day with a driver's license, or good for Mrs. Williams, who hasn't needed to drive in 15 years but has voted faithfully for 50 years? Her words painted a clear picture of the unfairness of the rules, showing how something might seem sensible to the rich expert. Judge Reeves was busy taking notes again, but this time he seemed more urgent, like he was trying to catch every detail of her strong arguments. The court heard arguments that early voting wasn't needed and people could just vote on election day. But that ignores the reality for many Americans. What about single parents working 2 jobs who can't get time off to vote? Or college students far from their home districts, making it tough to vote? Or older folks who need help getting to the polls and can only get a ride on certain days? These aren't made-up problems. They're everyday struggles that show why accessible voting is so important. Crockett's speech got more intense as she put this fight in a historical context. She spoke confidently to the court, saying, "We've been here before." She reminded everyone that after Reconstruction, Southern states didn't openly say they wanted to stop black people from voting. Instead, they claimed they just wanted to prevent voter fraud and keep elections honest. To do this, they created poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses, appearing neutral but designed to keep African Americans from voting. She said these tactics were made to look fair while blocking certain groups from voting. As Crockett spoke, the opposing lawyers got restless. They whispered and shuffled papers, maybe realizing their arguments didn't hold up against history and what's right. The tactics may have changed, but the goal is the same: to silence marginalized groups. Today, instead of poll taxes, there are ID requirements that cost money. Instead of literacy tests, there are complex registration processes. And instead of grandfather clauses, strict matching requirements unfairly affect people with name variations or small mistakes on their documents. Judge Reeves, clearly moved by Crockett's words, put down his pen and folded his hands, listening intently. He stared at Crockett as she spoke with growing passion. She declared that this isn't just about legal precedent or basic law, it's about what kind of country we want to be. Do we believe government works best when everyone can vote freely, or do we think voting is a privilege to be limited based on money, age, or location? The courtroom was filled with emotion. Some people in the audience teared up, seeing their own struggles in Crockett's powerful words. Mrs. Williams, a symbol of decades of civil rights work, sat in the courtroom. She had spent her life fighting for the right to vote, overcoming many obstacles. Crockett's words made it clear that she hadn't fought all those years to see her children face new voting hurdles. The civil rights heroes who died to get voting rights didn't do it, so we could go back to a time when voting meant jumping over artificial barriers created to exclude groups of people. Crockett brought her argument back to its legal foundation, ending her argument on a strong note. She spoke directly to the judge, pointing out clear proof. The restrictions suggested by the other side would put unfair burdens on underrepresented groups, older people, low-income families, and young voters. These actions don't stop real fraud. They just block people who have been historically marginalized from voting. They don't meet either the basic requirements of fairness or the core principles of our government. Her words resonated in the courtroom. Judge Reeves, now very still, kept his eyes locked on Crockett. His face showed he was carefully considering her convincing argument, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. The change in Judge Reeves's behavior was remarkable. It showed how one person's argument can go from the strict, careful stance of a cautious judge to someone clearly moved by the deep power of a well-argued case. At the start, he seemed reserved, even skeptical, carefully weighing each word and example. But as Crockett's passionate appeal grew, a dramatic change came over him. His face, once guarded, softened, showing a growing involvement that went beyond legal analysis. It was as if her words had touched his very soul, stirring emotions that logic alone couldn't contain. "I urge you to consider Mrs. Williams," he seemed to say with his eyes, as if asking her to think about the human cost behind the complicated legal arguments. During her speech, Crockett appealed not just to legal principles, but to the essence of government itself. She stressed that behind every legal case are real people whose lives are deeply affected by the decisions made. She made it clear that the choices made in this courtroom would extend beyond these walls, shaping the future of many people's lives. She called on the judge and everyone present to choose government over suppression, to choose inclusion over exclusion, and to embrace hope instead of fear. Her words offered a quiet but strong conviction, encouraging those present present to consider the basic values of their community. Crockett stepped back, finishing her speech. It was calm, but strong enough to grab everyone's attention more than yelling ever could. She spoke to Magistrate Reeves directly, with a quiet strength that filled the room. "Sir," she said, "you have the power to make sure Mrs. Williams can keep voting for many years. You can show her kids that her voice really matters in this country. You can prove that in America, the government isn't meant to make things complicated. It's here to help everyone fairly. We shouldn't make voting harder. We should try to make sure every voice is heard, every vote is counted." The courtroom went silent, almost heavy with anticipation. Magistrate Reeves stared at Crockett for what felt like forever, absorbing her words and the emotion behind them. His usual stern face softened, showing respect, appreciation, and maybe even a hint of inspiration. It was like her speech had touched him deeply. The opposing lawyers looked uneasy. Crockett's straightforward argument had suddenly made their complicated legal plans seem pointless. The lead lawyer, who had seemed so confident earlier, was now staring at his notes like they might hold some secret weapon to undo her point. His confidence was gone, replaced by doubt, as he realized the power of her argument. In the audience, civil rights supporters struggled to contain their emotions. Some were crying, knowing they had just seen something special, a moment that would be remembered in legal history. Their tears reflected the deep emotion in Crockett's words, which had struck at the heart of their fight for fairness. Legal professors and students scribbled notes, knowing they were witnessing a key moment that would be studied for years. Finally, Magistrate Reeves cleared his throat, signaling he was ready to speak. His voice, though calm, carried weight. "I want to thank both sides for their presentations today," he said. "This court will consider everything that's been said and will make a decision within 30 days. He paused, looking directly at Crockett as if acknowledging her influential speech. "I assure you that every point made today will be given careful thought." As the courtroom emptied, the atmosphere in the hallways remained charged with anticipation. Experienced lawyers exchanged glances, comparing Crockett's closing statement to famous moments in legal history, scenes they had only read about. Even the longtime court staff were captivated. One veteran assistant with decades of experience was overheard saying to a colleague, "I've worked here for 25 years and I've never seen Magistrate Reeves react to a closing argument like that." His tone was full of wonder, highlighting the significance of the moment. He was fixated on the judge's face, which showed subtle signs of emotion, rare for the usually stone-faced judge. He said that when the attorney was talking about Ms. Williams, his face changed and showed depth. At the same time, legal reporters began writing their stories, knowing that what had just happened in this courtroom was going to make national headlines. Quotes from Crockett's passionate argument quickly spread across social media platforms. People from all walks of life, legal scholars, civil rights advocates, and everyday citizens shared them, recognizing the significance of the moment. The stakes had never been clearer, and public concern was growing. Outside the courthouse, Professor Sarah Chen, an expert in constitutional law, told reporters that Crockett's speech was a masterclass in legal advocacy. She explained how Crockett had blended detailed legal analysis with a moving story that made complex legal principles feel personal and immediate. Chen said that Crockett's approach turned abstract legal ideas into relatable stories, captivating both legal experts and ordinary people. Judge instructor Michael Rodriguez, a legal expert who used to argue cases with Judge Reeves, also gave his opinion. He said, "I've never seen Judge Reeves so obviously impressed during a closing argument. He's known for keeping a straight face, but today you could see real emotion. That's rare for him." Rodriguez's comment showed how impactful Crockett's presentation was, even on a judge known for his composure. As things wrapped up, the opposing lawyers left the courthouse without saying anything, but their faces said it all. The confidence they showed earlier was gone, replaced by clear defeat. They seemed to know they'd been outmatched. Their earlier arrogance was replaced by a quiet understanding of Crockett's power. Soon after, clips of Crockett's closing statement went viral. The phrase "Mrs. Williams" blew up as tons of people shared stories of older family members who had trouble voting, making the issue feel real for a lot of people. Legal analyst Janet Williams, no relation to Mrs. Williams or Crockett, went on the news to talk about these events. She said that what happened in court was more than just a simple legal fight. It was a masterclass in persuasion. Williams explained that Crockett took complex legal ideas that are usually boring and made them resonate through personal stories that touched people's hearts. She didn't just cite laws. She set a new standard for how these arguments should be made. The social media response made Crockett's words even more powerful, especially with videos of Judge Reeves's subtle reactions during her presentation. One popular clip showed a split screen. On one side, side, Reeves's stern face during the opposition's argument. On the other, his attentive, respectful look during Crockett's closing, showing how much his attitude changed. Back in the Capitol, Crockett's colleagues in the legislature started paying attention to her amazing performance. Liberal leaders publicly praised her advocacy, with some calling her argument one of the most powerful they'd seen in years. Even some conservative members quietly admitted how strong and clear her presentation was, which was surprising. This unusual agreement showed how deeply she resonated, crossing party lines and proving her skills as a convincing advocate. Representative Maria Santos, known for her balanced stance within the Conservative Party, made a subtle comment saying, "I don't agree with all of Legislator Crockett's views," suggesting that while she might not agree with her on everything, her respect for Crockett's approach was clear. What happened in court that day was truly remarkable and worth talking about. Crockett made legal arguments with such skill that even people with traditional views had to admit they were valid. Her approach was not only carefully crafted, but also presented in a way that emphasized the importance of voting rights, reminding everyone why they're essential to our government. Her speech went beyond party lines, serving as a powerful reminder of the ethical and legal needs surrounding human rights. The Legislative African American Caucus quickly released a statement praising Crockett's legal brilliance and her passionate defense of human rights. They highlighted her ability to explain complicated legal ideas with clarity and confidence. Human rights groups followed suit, recognizing Crockett as a strong champion who could argue their case with unmatched skill, clarity, and moral force. Her impact was so profound that it seemed to improve the entire discussion about voting rights. Meanwhile, the law firm representing the opposition was in a tough spot. Their high-profile case, which they thought would win easily based on recent precedents, suddenly seemed open to criticism and possible defeat. Internal communications, leaked to the media, revealed that the firm's members were deeply worried about the change in events. One senior member said in these private exchanges, "We need to rethink our strategy." What happened today wasn't just a legal setback. It completely changed the argument. Crockett's persuasive arguments had not only challenged the legal basis of their case, but also shifted the moral narrative. Her presentation made it clear that the opposition's stance was not only legally questionable, but morally wrong. The clients who had hired the firm to defend voting restrictions that unfairly disadvantaged vulnerable communities were reportedly angry with how the case had unfolded. Some of these clients threatened to find new legal representation, feeling that their initial goals were now damaged by the court's new tone, and prospective legal experts pointed out that the main issue wasn't just the skill of the lawyers involved, but the basic weakness of defending restrictions that aim to disenfranchise marginalized populations. This understanding highlighted the ethical problem at the heart of the case. Supporting such restrictions became increasingly unsustainable in the face of Crockett's powerful ethical and legal argument. After Crockett's big closing statement, law schools all over started using videos of her speech in their training. Jennifer Lowe, a well-known professor at a top law school, said she's adding Crockett's argument to her course because it's exactly the kind of advocacy she wants her students to learn. It's legally sound and ethically strong, showing how personal stories can fit into legal reasoning to make what's at stake clear without losing intellectual honesty. Lots of basic law professors liked how Crockett tied together voting rights court cases. She didn't just drop names. She wove decades of legal history into a clear story that placed current problems in a wider history of unfairness. David Kim said Crockett's skill in linking things across time and legal developments shows a big step forward in how to argue these cases. Her presentation hit so hard that several law journals plan to put out special issues digging into her argument and what it means for voting rights fights. Legal scholars generally agreed that Crockett's approach has set a new standard for advocacy in human rights and voting law. Her speaking style and smart framing changed what successful legal arguments can look like in this crucial area. Plus, Judge Reeves's behavior during Crockett's speech became a hot topic in legal circles. Known for being super neutral, balanced, and calm, the judge's reaction to Crockett's points was different than usual. He was clearly engaged, focusing hard and showing some concern, which people thought was a big deal. Many saw this change as showing how deeply Crockett's arguments resonated, maybe even shifting the court's overall view and where the case would go. Overall, it wasn't just another day in court. It was a moment that showed the power of a well-made argument based on ethics and solid law. Crockett's presentation didn't just challenge the other side's case. It got people talking about voting rights, inspiring legal minds. Former clerks who'd worked for Judge Reeves were really surprised by his actions, and they told their reactions anonymously to keep their privacy. These folks, who had seen tons of court stuff, said Judge Reeves was famous for being emotional motionless, never showing anything during arguments or sessions. But one former clerk clearly remembered when Judge Reeves was clearly touched, so rare it left a mark. This person said the judge's emotional reply to Mrs. Williams's argument was so real and obvious that it showed how much her presentation resonated. The clerk said that this emotion was a clear sign of how persuasive her case had been. In legal circles, especially among conservatives who like a super-neutral courtroom, some critics weren't happy, saying Judge Reeves's sympathetic reaction might be out of line. But most legal experts and watchers who value court involvement with the argument's content said his response was right and justified. They claimed that such an emotionally aware reaction from a judge can recognize the human side of legal conflicts, especially when basic rights are involved. At the same time, beyond the courtroom, Mrs. Williams' story started to spread nationwide. Her story clicked with many families who had faced similar problems when trying to vote. A lot of these families hit institutional barriers, confusing rules, not enough info, or logistical nightmares that made voting seem impossible. So community groups started writing down their own stories of voting battles and wins, sharing these personal stories with local media and politicians. Within a week after the session, a grassroots thing called the Mrs. Williams Initiative was created. Its goal was to help seniors and low-income people navigate the confusing voting demands, like understanding and getting the needed ID. The group quickly picked up speed, getting donations of thousands of bucks and tons of volunteer hours from people inspired by Crockett's powerful case. These volunteers felt that their work could help remove roadblocks and empower sidelined groups. In Crockett's home area in Texas, community leaders jumped on it by setting up voter registration drives to boost voting among those facing problems. They also organized rides to help people get to polling places and get the needed ID papers. The immediate results were clear and inspiring. Voter registration numbers jumped in areas that had been seeing falling or flat numbers. This real growth showed that grassroots work can make a big difference in civic participation. Lawyers on both sides of the voting rights fights agree. Crockett's approach set a great example for future cases. She mixed legal details with the personal stories of those affected. This set a standard for human rights cases. Her method worked so well that it became a model all over. Lawyers for voting rights, plaintiffs in other states started making arguments based on the core rules. They also focused on the experiences of people affected, always pointing out the personal side of voting rights. This smart move led to wins in different places. These wins boosted efforts to protect voting rights nationwide. Legal experts looked at the impact of Crockett's courtroom show. Many said it was a turning point in the fight for fair elections. She showed that human rights arguments can go beyond party lines. They can appeal to a basic sense of fairness. Professor Chen, a well-known law expert, clearly explained why Crockett's method was so important. He said she reminded everyone that legal fights are about real people. She stuck to the legal rules but built her case on the personal experiences and struggles behind the core issues. By doing this, she showed everyone in the courtroom what was at stake with voting rights, no matter their politics. Judge Reeves gave his decision 3 weeks later. It was clearly influenced by Crockett's arguments and the powerful evidence she presented. He strongly struck down the proposed voting limits. He said they put unfair burdens on the right to vote. His decision showed he knew that protecting voting rights means following the rules. It also means understanding how policies affect actual people's ability to vote. Notably, Judge Reeves quoted Crockett's closing statement. He particularly emphasized her touching analysis of Mrs. Williams's situation. As she put it, the right to vote can't be an abstract idea. It must be a real thing for all citizens, no matter what problems they face. These problems might involve money, distance, or disabilities that make it hard to get the needed papers, especially when there's no good reason for these problems. This decision was celebrated as a big win for voting rights supporters. It proved that Crockett's strategy and hard work paid off. It also set a legal standard that would be cited in many similar cases across the country. Her courtroom showing had a huge influence beyond that one case. Later, legal scholars and human rights experts called Crockett's closing statement a key moment in the fight for human rights in modern America. She showed how a lawyer can mix legal skill with a genuine appeal to bridge the gap between complicated legal rules and the public, all while staying true to high standards. But maybe the most touching praise came from Judge Reeves himself. In a private letter to Crockett, he wrote, "In my 30 years as a judge, I've heard thousands of legal arguments, but few have so well combined legal skill with ethics like yours did. You reminded me why I chose this job, to make sure our justice system truly helps everyone, not just the lucky few who can deal with its complexities." The story of Judge Reeves's praise for Crockett's closing comments spread fast. It became more than just a moment. It became became a model for how government defenders can make their case. By mixing sharp analysis with ethics, they can make sure voices like Mrs. Williams are heard in American government. If you liked this story of legal success, consider joining or following changes that focus on such moments shaping our country's future. Sharing this story with others who trust in hard work can help spread the message of fairness. What do you think of Crockett's show? Share your thoughts in the comments. We appreciate hearing from you and value your part in these stories.